In today's Neville Goddard discussion, I would like to discuss self-confidence, conviction, and decision, stimulated by this quote here, in which he says, "Many persons, including myself, have observed events before they occurred. That is, before they occurred in this world of three dimensions. Since man can observe an event before it occurs in the three dimensions of space, life on Earth must proceed according to plan. And this plan must exist somewhere else in another dimension and be slowly moving through our space." Now, one of the reasons why I selected this particular quote here is because to me it is a integration of self-confidence, conviction, and decision. Essentially what he's saying is that we have the ability to see things into existence, which I would agree. We call this faith, imagining something and then seeing it all the way into fruition. This is something that we experience on the day-to-day journey. Every day we are imagining the different experiences, and perhaps for a lot of experiences we might be imagining it from the same perspective, and thus it seems to remain the same. We not only imagine based on stimulus of suggestions in which we receive from the five senses, but we can go beyond that and imagine things that we would say do not exist. He relates this over to this important quote here where he says, "The habit of seeing only that which our senses permit renders us totally blind to what we otherwise could see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctness of reality." So what we're talking about here is conviction and deciding upon a vision. Via the desires, we stimulate a scene, an imaginal scene, and we're doing this all day long. And every now and then we feel this conviction, this commitment to that vision. We say, some way, somehow, I'm going to make that happen. Now, we might not use those words, some way, somehow. But what we're actually doing is revealing our faith. See, if a person were to look at the evidence of the senses before they decide to do something, then they might be only limited by those potentialities that they could see via the five senses. Let's say a person is interested in starting a business. So they look around and they see other businesses who are performing a certain way, doing things a certain way. And they form the conclusion that based on the experiences of others, that's the totality of potentiality that exists. So they begin to construct in their imagination a scene based on what other people are doing or how other businesses work. When in actuality, what they can do, once they realize what he's saying here, is they can really go in and say, what is it that they truly desire? What is the kind of life that they want to live? What is the kind of business that they would have if there was no limitations? What would it look like if it was true? So we can either construct a scene based on the evidence of the senses, or we could go beyond that. Now, as children, this is something that we do regularly. We go into imaginary worlds. We construct imaginal scenes. And these imaginal worlds and imaginal scenes are stimulated by desire. As a result, we begin to creatively express from those imaginal scenes. A child might decide that they're going to do something with their life, and it might not be something that others around them know as potentiality, or based on the evidence of the senses, the child has two options. The child can continue to persist in that vision. This is how we see the innovation that we have nowadays. Much of this innovation was stimulated at a certain point in a person's life where they didn't see the proof via the senses, the five senses, but they saw it within the sixth sense of imagination. And they committed to it, and some way, somehow, they were able to bring it forth. We call this self-confidence, conviction. A person has a conviction to that end. They also have the self-confidence, fluidity of mind, the ability to work with the five senses as well as imagination, which to me is a perfect example of the entrepreneurial journey, which I believe is a fusion of arts and sciences, creative thinking and innovation, potentialities that others might not see as true, or for whatever the reason may be, doubt that it could possibly exist. So the entrepreneur then is challenged by it and is stimulated by the challenge. And through maintaining that persistence in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, they end up realizing that vision some way, somehow. They work with the evidence of their senses, the information, and they're able to readjust it, recombine it, the different elements, as well as the relationships, the resources, to bring forth the success. All stimulated by faith, or as Neville Goddard puts it, loyalty to the unseen reality. That's what we call self-confidence. So we want to develop this. He says, earnest, concentrated thought, focus on a particular direction, shuts out other sensations and causes them to disappear. We have but to concentrate on the state desired in order to see it. The habit of withdrawing attention from the region of sensation and concentrating it on the invisible develops our spiritual outlook and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of sense and to see that which is invisible. The vision is completely independent of the natural faculties. Open it and quicken it. Without it, these instructions are useless. For the things of the Spirit are spiritually discerned. So I had a conversation with someone today, and we were talking about self-confidence. He's probably watching this video here. And I said, self-confidence can be looked at as follows. Someone who has faith in a vision, and they maintain that faith in the vision, no matter what shows up on the journey to realizing that vision. And they don't know the way. They don't even know the how. But they seem to discover it more so each day. They seem to understand more. They seem to connect the relationships together, the resources. And they stay convicted, which we call the feeling of the wish fulfilled, all the way till they realize the vision. Another person, their confidence is based on the evidence of the senses. And I said to him, usually we're a combination of both. We have reference experience, which forms beliefs. And we also have the ability to develop faith like a child would, committing to a vision that goes beyond what we logically think is possible. Again, this is how we bring forth innovation. This is how we bring forth unique perspective, unique artistic expressions. To go beyond, allow this part of us which exists to be stimulated, as he refers to here. Assumptions awaken what they affirm. As soon as a man assumes the feeling of the wish fulfilled, his fourth-dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end, discovers methods for its realization. So, as we discussed in the last video when I was referring to Charles Haanel's book, The Master Key System, we call this the unseen forces. Another way of saying it is some way, somehow, I'm going to figure it out. Some way, somehow. One doesn't have to say unseen forces. They can say some way, somehow. And Neville refers to this as the fourth dimensional self, figuring out the ways of its attainment. However, we don't have to think about those things. Those are guided by intuition. As one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs when I had started my IT business back in the days, I used to play his commencement speech over and over again. He said, Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. See, because when we follow the heart and intuition, we actually listen to what we desire. And as a result of that desire, we are stimulated in our imagination something that perhaps goes beyond the five sensory evidence. And if we only commit to that and see it all the way to completion and not waver in that assumption, we will develop a higher degree of self-confidence. As I had shared with my friend, someone can be self-confidence completely based on faith. Someone can be self-confidence based on the evidence of the senses. I recommend a combination of both. And when you commit to a vision and bring it forth, what you'll notice is you'll understand yourself better. And when in doubt, we can work with this here. As he says, with your eyes closed and your physical body immobilized, induce a state akin to sleep and enter into the action as though you were an actor playing the part. Experience in imagination what you would experience in the flesh were you now in possession of your objective. Make elsewhere, here, and then now. And the greater you, using a larger focus, will use all means and call them good, which tend toward the production of that which you have assumed. See, we may have an overly identified relationship with mental chatter, which is a result of restrictive ways of looking at reality, which seem limited by the senses. The key word is seems. This mental chatter is generated within and can be changed within by connecting to the true inner voice, the one that leads you to the destination. I recommend watching the video I did on being your own best friend. Put a link in the description. I did this last week. And as we build this relationship with ourselves, we will be able to have an inner conversation with ourselves. And this, what Steve Jobs refers to as the noise of others' opinions, won't drown out our own inner voice. Our own inner voice will become more apparent. And this inner voice, sometimes referred to as intuition, will guide us to the destination. And all we want to do is continue to listen to it. Through the process of evaluating what shows up and asking the question, is it really so? Is it an empowering way of looking at whatever it is that shows up? Or is it a disempowering way of looking at whatever shows up? Is this a perspective that I want to identify with? Same conversation I had with this individual. He shared with me an experience. Those kinds of experiences in which we feel rejection have to be interpreted from an accurate way of looking at it. Rejection doesn't mean that you are not valuable. And we're speaking of sales, leadership. That's the meaning that we are giving to it. When someone rejects the proposition or the proposal, it doesn't mean that you are not good enough. Those are the interpretations that we have, and we can release from those interpretations. I suggested looking at it from a different perspective. You are divine perfection. And there can only be one interpretation. All things are leading you to your vision. Some way, somehow, it is leading you to your vision. So we reinterpret that particular experience. We say, I'm going to be able to stimulate the conversation to articulate the perspective, to bring forth a win-win deal. And as a result, what we'll notice is we will receive the hunches and inspirations within. We will be able to think clearly as well as intuitively be guided via our own inner voice real time as we're interacting. And I said to him that it takes practice, yes, but the more we practice this, the more we will find that we're able to maintain this state of mind during those experiences. And perhaps there might be times where it's challenging. However, as we've been practicing this, which is essentially reimagining, daily reimagining and as I shared in the last video, the compound effect of reimagining, what we will notice is that we will be easily able to do it, or it'll become easier to do it if we find ourselves being reactive to an experience in which we unconsciously apply an interpretation in which we say we're not good enough. The truth is, if you're divine perfection, there is no meaning that says that you are not good enough. That is true. The true meaning is that you are valuable and you are realizing more of your value each day as it's reflected to you by others reciprocating the value. He says there are two outlooks on the world possessed by everyone: a natural focus and a spiritual focus. The evidence of the senses, the five senses, might suggest a limiting interpretation, but these are mere suggestions of interpretations from within ourselves as a result of certain past ways of thinking. From a spiritual focus standpoint, the experience is in harmony and in contribution to your vision. And so, as he says, men believe in the reality of the external world because they do not know how to focus and condense their powers to penetrate its thin crust. If we can look beyond the experience and recognize that we are assigning interpretation to the experience, then in that moment or upon reflection in the evening, which is why I recommend reflecting at the end of the day, and Neville refers to this as well. He calls this revision at the end of the day, reflecting. And going beyond those interpretations that we're giving to the experience, seeing beyond it to the end, and reinterpreting that experience to be in relationship with that end. For example, as we were talking about business, the rejection no longer implies that you are not good enough. The so-called rejection has a different meaning. It's optimization data. There's certain things that you could do with optimization data. You could change how you communicate. You can optimize your product or service. You can present it a little differently. You can help them overcome an objection that they have, which is authentic and true. And the answer really depends on the scenario. However, upon reflection, you'll find the accurate answer, and you'll find that it will never limit you. As a matter of fact, what you'll find is that it'll encourage you, and it'll stimulate you back into going at it again. And so what he's suggesting here is actually something that many of us do. A lot of times we're not aware that we're doing it, but we could do this more often, which is essentially to reimagine the different experiences that happen on the journey, in which we call them limiting or disempowering, which seem to suggest, or the opinions suggest, that we're not valuable, and we can reinterpret or reimagine it to the truth of the matter. You are prosperity. We've talked about this through our conversations when we were discussing the work of Charles Fillmore. Prosperity is our true nature. If prosperity is our true nature, and who we are is a person of value, and we go down this self-realization journey to recognize our value more so through increasing our awareness, which we talked about in our last Neville video, then anything that limits us as far as our own interpretations of ourselves in relation to what we express is opportunity to change as far as inner relationship goes. And what this allows us to do, going back here, is to cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible. As he says, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses. And those opportunities that I suggested to him do just that. And it's something that I suggest to everybody that I deal with. I pretty much say the same thing during my consulting, during my leadership experience, including my own inner conversations with myself, leading myself, is, am I really interpreting what it is that is showing up right here from a true and accurate perspective? Or am I imagining it to imply something that is not true? That is grounds right there for deliberately disentangling our minds from the evidence of the senses. and refocus our attention on the invisible state, which essentially means, how does it ideally look? Allow yourself the freedom and flexibility to reimagine it from a place of love and ideal, even if the evidence of the senses denies it. Because what you'll find is when you go back into that interaction, is you'll notice that it'll change. How you relate to it will change. How they relate to you will change. And this change may be gradual, as we had discussed also in the last video. However, we have an opportunity in that moment to reaffirm the changes, to actually say to ourselves in that moment that what we imagine to be true is becoming true. Look at this new evidence of the senses. And thus we align the five sensory with the sixth sense. And we'll know that the causative factor was what we imagined to be different, harmonious, and we commit to it. And thus, as a result of it, our self-confidence increases. We have a higher degree of faith. So decisiveness can be looked at from the perspective of, I decide to look at what's showing up from a place of harmony. And if I show up to it again, I will notice that it will change a little bit more so. Or maybe a lot. Sometimes things change gradually. Sometimes things change drastically. I don't have to think about that, as he says here. As soon as the man assumes the feeling of the wish fulfilled, his fourth dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end and discovers methods for its realization. We don't need to overthink it. All we have to do is remember that, as we had discussed in the last Neville Goddard conversation, imagination creates reality. And as we continue to build this relationship with our imagination, we'll find that it's easier to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And we'll also recognize that one of the reasons why he suggested state akin to sleep here is because perhaps they're arguing in their own mind, and as a result, they're unable to receive their own suggestion, and they're letting the mental chatter recreate itself, which is why I recommend going through the 7-day mental diet process by Emmett Fox, which will be in contribution, which helps release from a lot of this overthinking, allowing us to harmonize the thinking with the intuition. So we're thinking accurately, so we can actually be able to have an inner dialogue, an inner conversation that is productive, that is effective, that is one that you would have with, let's say, a mentor. You could do this within yourself. And that inner conversation is also what we are imagining, which is thus then creating reality to reflect. So if we need to, we can do this at the end of the night and imagine the ideal of these experiences, reimagining it to be in a way that's in harmony with the vision. And we now have the understanding to a deeper degree that perhaps we're overly identifying with the five sensory experience, and perhaps developing a habit of only seeing that which our senses permit, thus rendering us totally blind to what we otherwise could see. So we're talking about potentiality here. And there's infinite potentiality. And we want a certain fluidity of mind to be able to reveal that potentiality and commit to it in our imagination. So let's conclude this conversation with an affirmation to further instill this understanding. We could say, I realize that I have the ability to observe events before they occur and commit to them in my imagination. This conviction and decision elevates my self-confidence. As a result, I'm able to look beyond what the five senses may appear to permit and see the accurate interpretation that is in harmony with my vision. As a result of identifying this accurate interpretation, I'm able to commit to it in my imagination and move forward from a place of flow, transmuting obstacle into opportunity. As a result, I find myself less reactive as I develop this ability to assess the interpretation that I'm giving to the experiences, and if needed, change the interpretation as I realize that assumptions awaken what they affirm. This brings me into the feeling of the wish fulfilled. As my fourth dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end, discovers methods for its realization, as I observe the changes and eventually realize my vision, I develop a higher degree of faith and self-confidence. This further allows me to see beyond what the five senses may permit. As a result, I return more to a childlike state of potentiality, curiosity, and moving in a direction of what I truly desire, stimulating in my imagination how I truly want to experience the day-to-day journey and the visions that I commit to bringing forth. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.